Okay, thank you. So as Eric said, we are presenting some of the ideas from our M.Ed graduating paper. We do come from the perspective of elementary school teachers. So the theory that we're drawing on is really to support our work in the classroom. The title of our paper is Critical Literacy Using Picture Books to Read the World. Okay.
So we recognize that our role as teachers is sort of changing due to a changing educational climate. And we don't see our role as teachers simply to fill our students with knowledge or to give them information. And as Piaget so famously said, we don't see our students as empty vessels waiting to be filled. What we do see as important is teaching our students how to engage with all this information that's presented to them and that is so readily available to them now due to changes in technology.
We want to teach our students to question and challenge the world around them. We want as well to empower our students with this ability to question dominant ideologies, to critique social constructions that are present in our everyday life. So we don't see schools as a place to just learn facts, particularly with our really young students. We see schools as a place to create critical awareness of the social structures and institutions that shape our everyday thinking.
And we want to teach our students how to sort of deconstruct these social constructions that are presented to them on a daily basis through skills such as inquiry, questioning, and critique. So we're looking for a pedagogical framework that really reflects these ideals. And we looked at Paulo Freire, who's sort of been labeled as the father of critical literacy. He was a rural literacy educator in rural Brazil. And he states that, quote, the goal of education should be to develop the student's power to perceive critically the way that they exist in the world.
When looking for pedagogy to support what we want to promote in our classroom, as mentioned, we identified with the ideas of theorists such as Freire, in addition some of the work of McLaren, Lancashire, and Noble, to name just a few. But as teachers, we're left with the question of how do we implement such a complex framework and such grand ideas into our classrooms with young students. So we then looked for work that other teachers have done in this area in elementary schools, and we came across teacher researchers Vivian Vasquez and Wendy Morgan, who have done critical literacy work and they've implemented critical literacy practices in elementary school classrooms and typically report back their findings through case studies.
So I think that looking at the case studies that these two teacher researchers presented really helped us try to answer this question of how do we take critical literacy theory and actually put it into practice in elementary school. So these researchers in their case studies really emphasize the fact that texts aren't simply limited to fictional picture books, but they can also be everyday texts. So for example, magazine articles or advertisements, commercials, things that they're presented with on a daily basis where there are social constructions presented within them, but you don't necessarily always notice it. So this is an example of an everyday text. It's an advertisement for every day is Mother's Day. And we could ask them questions such as, who is this text made for? Who made this text? What is the message? How is the woman portrayed in this text? Does this text reflect your household? And how would you change this text? Whose voice isn't heard in this?
So the teacher researchers that we're drawing on emphasize the role of the teacher as a facilitator through questioning and guiding your students through a certain type of inquiry and a way of thinking about a piece of text. The teaching framework we're going to share with you today does rely on picture books as a tool to facilitate critical literacy. So we've pointed out that this is not something limited to picture books, but for the purposes of today, we're going to share some of the things we have done with picture books. It's been mentioned already in this room that Picture books are widely available in all Vancouver teaching contexts, whereas maybe iPads are not. So it's something that we are able to use. As well, they address multimodal learning, which we've heard about, because of the reliance on visuals. And they're also an accessible literacy for readers with a range of reading levels.
So similar to what Kathy was actually just saying, we also have a very specific definition of what a picture book is. The picture books that we selected for our classroom, they're ones that deal with social justice issues. So for example, things such as gender or immigration, xenophobia, equality. They cover a range of reading abilities because the text can be accessed from a variety of levels, in the sense that it can be looked at from the multiple layers of the book. So a more advanced reader could look deeper into the book, whereas an emerging reader could use the visuals to help assist and decode the print in that sense. And finally, most importantly, is that the picture books that we select are multimodal. So to quote Lewis, the key to understanding what makes a picture book multimodal is the recognition that within each picture book, the print and the visuals work simultaneously to create meaning and to create overall meaning. So, for example, this is taken from Anthony Brown's Voices in the Park, and Anthony Brown is a master at the true picture book in our sense. And it says, "You get some frightful types in the park these days. I called this name for what seemed like ages." So that without the image has a completely different meaning when you recognize that this is the person speaking.
All right, so I'm going to go into some of the work I've done in my classroom of grade 3 students of using the book The Rabbits, a very well-known picture book by John Marston and Sean Tan. So I was teaching my grade 3s about the traditional culture of Pacific Northwest Coast First Nations when some of my students asked me if First Nations people were still around. And they asked, where are they? Instead of answering the question or trying to just move on to what I actually was supposed to be teaching, I took that as an opportunity to kind of push our thinking further and question, why are you asking this? Where are you getting these ideas from? And it's the act of the questioning that is really where this deep inquiry, this deep learning is coming from. They're questioning the world around them. So I'm familiar with this book. This is a story, it's a colonization tale of a group of rabbits arriving in a new place and slowly taking over the land from its original inhabitants. The text in this picture book is very minimal, and much of the story is told through the illustrations. I worked with my grade 3 students in deconstructing this text around the themes of colonization that they had already begun to ask questions about. After reading the book with the students, I had my students create a tableau of a scene that they thought would capture this story 50 years into the future, past the ending of the book. Prior to doing that, some of the critical questions that I posed to them, and keep in mind, these are grade 3s, so this is big stuff for them, and they are interested and motivated to do this. So we talked about whose perspective might you want to represent if you were going to take this story and continue it 50 years into the future. Whose perspective wasn't in the story that you may need to include? What was the message that the author of this story was trying to tell, and how might you try to capture that in your tableau? The role of technology was brought up as well, not by me, but by the students. How would the relationship between these two groups change over the course of time? How were Aboriginal people, they were making these connections between the original inhabitants and Aboriginal people, and these were the terms that they were coming up with. How are Aboriginal people shown in this book? How are they represented? How are the invaders, as they became called in my classroom, represented? And how would you feel about these two groups over the course of time? So my students went, they got in their groups, and they created these tableaus presented to the class. Then we moved on to talk about where their ideas about the way they represented the story 50 years later came from. Because we had some groups who obviously had some understanding that, you know, this story did not end up well for those Aboriginal people. There was no peace. They did not get their land back. So I'm drawing out of the students, where do your understandings about these ideas come from? There were other students who gave an alternative construction of this colonization tale, where they did a tableau of some type of peace treaty between these two groups. And the students were able to connect their constructions of the situations to real life events and things that they saw going around out in the world, things that they saw on the news. So it was really interesting to see how they would reflect these realities and then where they thought that their ideas came from. Another activity we did was writing in roles. So the students were required to take on the point of view of either the rabbits or the original inhabitants, or vice versa, and they were to write to the other group. So here's an example. So this is one grade 3 boy. He is a struggling reader and a struggling writer, yet here's the thinking he's able to come up with. So, dear people of this country, he's writing from the point of view of a rabbit. Why do you live in a tree? Because it's fun, convenient, easy to live in. I wonder what you eat. We are taking your kids in your community because we don't have enough resources and food back where we live. We feel sort of bad for you people, but it's for your own good. From the rabbits. So this is a student who's thinking about colonization from the colonizer's point of view. I think it would be very easy for children to read a book like this and decide that the rabbits were wrong, they're bad, they're bullies. However, we all know that issues around colonization are not that simple. And to have children start looking at it from other voices and multiple perspectives, I think is quite profound. You can also see in this boy's letter that he's questioning cultural difference, and he's questioning the lack of understanding that one group has about the other group. So through both these activities, the grade 3 students were delving into themes around colonization and power hierarchies. They inquired into multiple perspectives of the groups involved. They questioned their own identities and their own understandings in connection with this colonization tale. I'm going to be presenting the book titled 10,000 Dresses. It's by Marcus Ewart and it's illustrated by Rex Ray. And I found this book to be quite useful to deal with issues of gender hierarchy and transgendered youth. So the story is about a child named Bailey. Bailey is biologically a boy, but identifies as a girl. And Bailey's family doesn't support his identity as a girl. And this really weighs on Bailey throughout the entire story. And although I teach grade 2, so most of my students are 7 years old, and while the idea of talking about gender roles and gender stereotypes and those social constructions and transgendered youth might seem a bit too heavy or mature, I found that with my students, they already had a very strong sense of what is boy and what is girl, even at the age of 7. And these are all social constructions that they have been presented with and have internalized. And the point of doing a book like this is to really address the fact that there is nothing biologically inherent about what makes you behave or to be a boy or to be a girl, but these are all social constructions, and it's very important to be aware of this. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but it's just important to be aware of how these social constructions sort of shape your thoughts. So, prior to reading the book, I presented the students with a picture of Bailey on the front cover where he's wearing a crystal gown, or I should say she's wearing a crystal gown. And the idea of it was I wanted them to write down what they were wondering about, some questions they had about this picture, and then to maybe draw some inferences. So what would they infer based on this picture? And before I had handed out all the pictures, immediately some kids said to me, "Can I draw hair on this girl?"
And is this girl wearing a bun? Can I draw hair on it? And they were very curious about, is this a boy or is this a girl? And it was very, very important for them to be able to label if it's a boy or a girl. And I could see immediately that they had been strongly developed ideas of what it means to be a boy or a girl, and that this doesn't necessarily fit in with their understanding of what a boy or a girl is. Yeah. So I raised a lot of questions about how does this fit in with your idea of being a boy or being a girl, and they did some writing. I'm not sure if you can see it, but what one of the children, I teach in an all-girls school, so what she inferred is, I infer that he's crazy because boys don't wear dresses. So automatically that sort of represents what her understanding of what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl. And we did some other activities, I'm just going to wrap it up quite quickly, where I had two silhouettes, one of Bailey's father and one of Bailey, and while we read the book for a second time, I asked them to come up to the board and to jot down some feelings that they thought either of these characters would have. And what was really interesting was where they got these ideas from the father's perspective. So he was embarrassed because he thinks boys shouldn't be wearing dresses, but I have a friend who's a boy and he likes pink, and that's sort of the same thing. He wants his son to grow up big and strong, and he wants his son to believe girls are weak. He wants girls to like his son, and they won't if he wears dresses, and maybe he's worried because he wants to protect his son, and he doesn't want him to get bullied when he's older. So these were all sort of ways for them to understand the father's perspective. So just like with the colonizer's point of view that other boy had written.
All right, so to wrap up, we have found that children are highly capable of deconstructing text, and they're also very motivated and interested into inquiring and questioning larger social justice themes that they might not otherwise talk about.
We think that like the idea of the picture books is to be a stepping stone to greater in terms of digital technology, and to be able to read and interpret other texts that are out there.
Thank you.